The Republic of Altus was engulfed in a civil war. Colonel Akanteras of the Altian Armed Forces had attempted to pull off a coup in the nation's capital, but his plan had backfired. The colonel refused to back down though, and the nation was now split. On one side, you have the Loyalists. Fighting for freedom, they're intent on restoring the civilian government and arresting the rogue colonel. They're primarily composed of civilian militias and ex-AAF soldiers who've defected from the colonel's forces. Opposing the Loyalists, you have the Altian Armed Forces under Colonel Akanteras. They're heavily outnumbered, but are better equipped and trained than their Loyalist counterparts. After the AAF failed to capture Kovela, new lines were drawn. With the bulk of his men around Athera, Akanteras' forces have successfully split the island in two, but their defenses are faltering from aggressive Loyalist assaults. The town of Laka has been especially hard hit, with most of its defenses destroyed and garrison dead after days of brutal fighting. If the Loyalists manage to capture Laka, the colonel's defensive line will crumble. The AAF need to reinforce the city and fortify it if they don't want to lose the war. However, they've been unable to due to the Loyalists' assaults. That's where the AAF's second company comes in. Composed of 7 infantry squads, a sniper element, and 2 air assets, their goal is to disrupt the attacks on Laka long enough for other AAF forces to move into the city and set up new defenses. To disrupt the attacks, 2nd Company will assault the town of Agios Dionysios, a Loyalist logistics hub. If 2nd Company captures the town, the Loyalists will have to refocus all their efforts on retaking it, which should give the forces around Laka ample time to build its defenses back up. Agios is heavily defended though. The Loyalists had spent their time well, and set up fortified buildings, roadblocks, and trenches. The company would be in for a hell of a fight. They flanked the city, approaching it from the south. They were quickly spotted by Loyalist patrols though, and found themselves under fire over a kilometer away from the town. Agios' garrison started throwing everything ahead at them. Static machine guns opened fire. Patrols rerouted to engage the AAF. An overzealous militia driver even attempted to rush their position in his technical. However, he was cut down before he could reach their line. The unit was stationary and engaging any targets that came their way, but they couldn't afford to stay put. Every minute they weren't moving on the town was another chance for Loyalist reinforcements to outflank them. The company commander decided to stop holding back, and he ordered his support elements to engage the town. Kestrel, the unit's air element, strafed Agios, hitting the town with rockets and eliminating hostile vehicles and defensive positions. Python, the unit's sniper element, meanwhile began engaging as well, taking out priority targets. Some civilians were unfortunately caught in the strafing runs, but that was a price the AAF were willing to pay. Thanks to their support elements, they were no longer being suppressed, and soon the infantry was back on the move. Some squads moved into the hills and took over Loyalist positions, using them to engage the town and provide covering fire. Others, meanwhile, moved onto the town itself using smoke for cover. They'd be engaging in urban fighting, ready to get their noses bloody. The Loyalists were ready for a fight. Every street corner had a fortified building waiting, with militiamen intent on making the AAF bleed for every inch. The AAF soldiers didn't care though. They had their orders. They set themselves up on the roads and cut down militiamen who crossed their paths. They stormed into houses, killing any militiaman unfortunate enough to stand in their way. House by house, street by street, the AAF cleared the town, wiping out the Loyalists like an infestation.
Hey, nigga, watch out! Get out of the way, nade out! That was on me! What the fuck? Okay.
The few civilians left in the town were rounded up by the soldiers too. Some were let off easy, only being detained, while others weren't as lucky.
So which right?
Agios had now fallen, but the soldiers didn't have time to rest. Their sniper element had been doing their best to stall enemy reinforcements, but militia had discovered their position and snuck up on them, forcing them to retreat. Soon, a wave of Loyalists would come crashing into the city, and if the company wasn't ready, they'd end up like the militia they had just beaten. The company commander ordered his men into defensive positions, and they entrenched themselves, ready to hold off as long as they could. It wasn't long before fighting restarted, as militia came pouring in from every direction, desperate to avenge their fallen brothers.
Fuck's sake.
Just as the defense was ramping up, though, the company commander got a radio call from Colonel Akanteros himself. The colonel had bad news. One of the Altian Air Force's highest-ranking officers had managed to evade capture during the coup attempt, a certain Colonel Bakas. His fellow officers had all been arrested by Akanteros' men during the coup, but he was home on parental leave taking care of his newborn son, and so he'd escaped the army's clutches. Akanteros needed Bakas either dead or in custody. The Air Force colonel had too much legitimacy to his name, and if he came out against Akanteros, it may cause some of his own men to switch sides to the Loyalists. The Loyalists also knew this fact, and so they'd kept Bakas under house arrest in his home in Kor, protected by an entire SWAT detachment. Second Company's commander understood what he needed to do, but he only had so many men to spare. He ended up only sending one of his squads, call sign Phalanx, to head to Kor and capture the other colonel. While the other squads fought for their lives, Phalanx headed up the hill to their north, bypassed Loyalists on their way to assault Agios, and soon found themselves overwatching Kor. The town was being patrolled by Loyalist militia, and the colonel's house had been turned into a veritable compound by the Altian police. The soldiers began by engaging contacts from up the hill. However, the squad lead decided to opt for a bolder approach. He chose 3 of his best men to come with him, and he charged towards the colonel's house in his Fennec, breaking through a stone wall and attempting to storm inside. Unfortunately, the plan backfired, and only the squad leader survived it. The rest of his men had been picked off by the SWAT officers around them, bleeding out around his vehicle. Bleeding heavily, the squad leader pushed upstairs regardless and confronted the Air Force colonel, getting him to surrender to him. The police were storming up the building, though, and the squad leader knew he'd never make it out alive. With police officers about to close in, he did the only thing he could. The mission was a success, but at a high cost. Back towards Agios, the defense hadn't slowed down at all. The soldiers of Second Company were firing in every direction, but were outnumbered and outflanked. The Loyalists had brought in new units, specifically AAF defectors. They were better equipped and trained than the militia, acting as shock troops for the Loyalist forces, and were putting real pressure on the company. Bullets were flying in every direction. More and more soldiers were getting wounded. Casualties were beginning to ramp up. Their position was becoming more and more untenable. Just then, a radio call came in from their command. The defenses in Laka had been built, and the garrison replaced. Second Company was now free to fall back. A new defensive line had been established. The company commander gave out the order, and soon the squads were pulling back, everyone running for their vehicles. The air assets covered them as best they could, dumping all their ammo into the Loyalists to stall their advance. With the squads mounted, the entire unit began speeding towards their defensive line. They'd fought hard and long, and had accomplished all their goals. Footage from the aftermath of the battle soon spread through social media like a wildfire. The devastation the AAF had brought, the civilians found dead in the streets, all made their way through the news. Up until now, the global community had been ignoring the events on this tiny island. However, with reports of atrocities, more and more eyes began drifting towards it. If only they knew how bad it'd get.
Go ahead and break off.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. A special thank you to my channel members, Midix Lion, Elzag Beg, Scout Trooper, Belmon, Flanella, Cretus, Fornicator, Colonel Oddball 27, Dransky Firefly, Corey Dawson, Doc Omar, Brian Bailey, Alec Trakler, Twike, and Altonio. You all make this possible, so thank you so much for the support. Alright, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.